you're surrounded by people who follow an Abrahamic tradition that actually think that your whole religion, your whole theology, and your whole system and all your scriptures are actually just corrupt, illegitimate, false, and lead you to eternal damnation.
Coexistence requires you to be at peace with someone else, practicing, living, believing something else, as long as it doesn't impose on your own ability to practice your thing.
Because some people might struggle with this conversation, right? It's a hot topic, right? And it's a controversial topic. So
I think running away from impending challenges is a surefire way to a miserable life.
if we want to live in a real unified society where Hindu, Muslim, Christians can be together, we need to just really tackle this belief of exclusivity of truth so that there can be real love, real harmony, and real mutual respect and reverence. And that requires smart thinking, not naive thinking.
The point I'm trying to make is I want Europe to learn from the mistakes that India made and others historically, and not wage war on Islam or to close the doors necessarily.
We are increasingly facing a world and situations where our beliefs are going to come under scrutiny and opposition will come, and we must know how to react.
So if someone's coming into Europe, are you compatible culturally, value-wise, etc., with what you are entering into? What I'm saying is there should be much more intelligent, aware scrutiny.
I always rally against this doctrine of exclusivity of truth because it's a very, very toxic doctrine.
Jai Gurudev, Mayuran.
Jai Gurudev.
Welcome back on the podcast, third episode together.
Yeah, I think this is part of a long-term plan as a hostile takeover of your podcast. The Mayuran Central Nathan podcast.
I was thinking that we could make it, it's like a duo, like the two of us could do a podcast together, but if it's a takeover, it's a takeover. Today we're going to talk about, as usual, a hotly debated topic. I think it's what we do. It's what we've always done historically, to just discuss difficult things. And I think it's, again, fruitful to do it in front of the camera, get people to listen to our perspectives. And the topic today we're going to deal with is a sort of introspective one, where we're looking at our own community, first Bhakti Marga, but then beyond that to the wider Vaishnava community, in relation to other world religions and primarily Abrahamic religions. The sort of naivety that exists in the landscape in relation to Abrahamic religions, how we view them, how we dialogue about them, with them, amongst ourselves, the views we hold. And I think we want to unpack a little bit the consequences that can have in our own psyche and in our own behaviors and in the wider world. I think that's something we've both picked up on enough times in our experiences teaching, dialoguing, producing content on the internet, etc. And I think that this is something that needs to be discussed to really sort of nail down what it is that people need to be aware of to start to formulate different ways of thinking, different ways of meeting this situation. So to sort of kick this off, what are the instances that you've encountered amongst the devotees that really showed, in your opinion, this naivety in relation to the topic?
So yeah, that word naivety is the key thing. So naivety is a kind of, let's call it an innocent lack of knowledge, slight ignorance about the wider world and the reality of the world. So when we talk about sometimes other religions, when you come to Bhakti Marga, Guruji, it's about love, it's about compassion, it's about everyone coming together. The key word is unity. We should all be together as one. The world must be made a better place. The Mother Earth must be served. We must all come together, sharing in this wonderful utopian idea of love. And that's somewhere inside of us. Perhaps when we first come to Guruji, a lot of people, a lot of devotees will come with this kind of perspective, this kind of impression of what Bhakti is about, what Vaishnavism is about, what Guruji is about. And the naivety comes in when you don't understand that underpinning this love and this pursuit of love are principles. There are clear directions of what we believe and what we do not believe. We're vegetarian, right? Well, vegan, whatever. So ahimsa is a big value. So if somebody says, I love eating meat, and eating and killing and slaughtering animals is the right thing to do, it's a good thing to do, immediately that love that we want to express, which is underpinned by a principle of ahimsa, comes into conflict with somebody who says, actually, killing meat is fine. So we have a conflict, we have a tension. And what we've both encountered is when we teach devotees or when we bring up topics is people sometimes are unaware or at least afraid of these tensions between the principles that underpin that love that Guruji speaks about and that what we follow. And so, yeah, you asked me for an experience, and classic experience when we were talking about interfaith dialogue is I made a video once, like a few years ago, good few years ago now, and it basically was just highlighting the difference between Hinduism, Sanatana Dharma, Christianity and Islam, the Abrahamic religions, this doctrine of exclusivity of truth, that if you do not convert to our religion, then you're going to be condemned in some way and so on. And I was simply highlighting the obvious differences between the two ways of looking at religion that I think even most Christians who believe that and most Muslims who believe that would agree with me on. The video got posted on a chat group, and let's say to a degree, all hell broke out, right? Lots of conflict. A lot of people were saying, I don't like this. You're putting down other religions. You're contesting other religious beliefs. Everything is about love. This is not Guruji's teachings. Guruji would not be happy with us believing these things. And there was a whole kind of massive furore that blew up, and I tried to kind of find the language. But it kind of got out of hand, and then I think even you kind of stepped in with quite a hefty document trying to explain step by step why me actually bringing up these issues and these differences and actually elevating the glory of Sanatana Dharma and Vaishnavism ahead of the Abrahamic religions and some concepts was valid.
Yeah.
And that was a real kind of watershed moment for a lot of devotees to suddenly realize that, hold on a minute, love is there, yes. Unity is the goal, yes. But hold on a minute, these principles that we carry, we actually believe in stuff. We have principles. And for that love to flourish, we should also be willing to protect those principles and really know how to understand those principles in relation to the other. And that was a kind of real, like a eye-opening moment for a lot of devotees, I think.
I think that one of the problems that we have in this topic is that a lot of people have good intentions, but I stand by the opinion that good intentions, if they're married with a lack of intelligence, so almost like a dumb set of good intentions, can still lead to terrible outcomes. A lot of people have good intentions, they just don't know how to act upon them, and then they end up making a mess of things. And I think it's a common thing that you find among spiritual people, that they have this intention of harmonizing and creating unity. And I think it's a good intention. It's clearly stemming from a good place. It clearly aligns with certain Vaishnava principles, Vasudeva Kutumbakam, these sort of things. They drive us towards harmony, towards coexistence and unity and all these sort of ideals. But the problem is that I think the way people understand how that's going to come about and what are the challenges that spirit is going to encounter is they're incredibly ignorant towards that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a kind of, in the political spectrum, you have the left and right. Sorry to politicize a spiritual conversation, but when you're on the left, sometimes it's characterized, and this is a characterization, but like you're kind of open, you're kind of, yes, embracing different things, very reverential to everything and so on. There's a kind of openness to the left. But then the conservative mindset is, hold on a minute, no, this is the way, this is the path, this is a discipline, this is the way forward and so on, right? And I think when you come to Guruji, you come with this kind of left liberal mentality, but as you go and walk with Guruji and actually take up a path, a Vaishnava path, you have to adopt to a certain degree a kind of conservative mentality, right? That kind of idea of this is a path. I must honor the borders of this path, honor the disciplines and principles of this path, and be very, very clear about when I'm within the path and when I'm straying from the path. Who am I in relation to the other? These are things that stop that naivety taking hold, I think.
No, I do agree with that. I think it actually stems from another fundamental issue is that people don't really know Guruji. They don't really understand the Guruji that we know and to the extent that we know. And I think that they're ready to speak too soon in total terms about how this is or is not Guruji's teaching. or this is in alignment or isn't in alignment with Guruji's teaching. And I think it takes a huge amount of depth, of connection with him, of studying his words, of understanding his perspective on things, of dialoguing with Guruji to understand where he actually stands on most of these things, to be able to sit there in front of anyone and say, yes, this is what Guruji thinks, this is what Guruji wants. And so in that example that you brought up, it's clear to me that Guruji was in defense of your video. He agreed with your video.
Yeah.
Yeah. This was actually something that people didn't understand, but correct me if I'm wrong, but almost every video that you produced was passed through Guruji in a sense.
Just about, yeah.
Yeah, so
yeah.
I mean, Guruji was a constant part of the process is what I mean.
Yeah.
And he had the right to tell you, no, I don't agree with this.
Yeah.
This is not something that I stand by, and you wouldn't publish those videos. It actually happened, right?
Yeah.
And so that's a thing people also fail to understand. It's that we're not irresponsible, sort of self-promoting devotees. I don't think either one of us have ever had that sort of mentality. I stand by that we don't have it to this day. And so if we're going to come out here and say things, forcefully, trying to make an impact in people's minds, it's because we have a degree of confidence that Guruji stands behind it.
But what I found is when you talk about certain things, like, for example, like in Hinduism we believe this, and then in, say, Christianity or Islam they believe this, and so therefore we do not agree with that, we do not agree with this. And then sometimes from devotees I've had this thing of, yes, but Myron, you don't understand, not everyone believes. Oh yes, Myron, yeah, I get your point, but this. Myron, I get your point, but that. And then as you keep dialoguing, you keep saying, yeah, but you start to realize, but that's not the point I was making. I was making this point. And they're kind of hitting the point, but then going somewhere else, hitting the point and then going there. Why is that happening? It's because you start to realize you're not dealing with logic anymore.
Right.
You're dealing with a samskara, right? A samskara that basically says, no, I don't want to see this religion in a bad light. I don't want to create division. I don't want to create issues and tensions between us and other religions. That samskara doesn't want that to happen. So therefore, the arguments are not coherent, and they kind of just they dodge the point that I'm trying to make. And that's what I've often found when talking about it.
I think it's what you say, but I think it's even an adjusted version of it. I think people have a very strong identity of how they see themselves. And so they see themselves as compassionate, open-minded people, right? You painted that picture of the sort of traditional left viewpoint. And I think people do see themselves that way. The minute they become spiritual, they want to characterize themselves as being harmonious, compassionate, open-minded individuals. And Guruji often criticizes narrow-mindedness.
Yeah. And
so they take these things and they say, okay, well, I clearly don't want to be narrow-minded. And so when these things are starting to be presented like this isn't compatible with this, therefore you've only got to align with this and you can't align with that simultaneously because there's an incompatibility issue, people lack the maturity of understanding, lack the perspective, in my opinion, to see that as anything other than narrow-mindedness. So they look at that and say, if I take to this belief, if I agree with Mayuran on this topic, it means I'm becoming narrow-minded. I mean, how often have you been accused of that?
Yeah. And especially when you know me as a person, like.
Right, because you're very opinionated. That's a fact. You're an opinionated person, and you tend to arrive at your opinions after a lot of thought and contemplation. That's the Mayuran that I know, at least, and I have something similar in that sense. I'd like to think about things, and then I'm going to hold an opinion. It's an opinion that I've arrived at, not willy-nilly, sort of not just randomly, but because I've actually thought about the thing, and I've reached this conclusion in coherence with the rest of my life, and Guruji and whatever else. And so it tends to be a deficiency of people like us that when we get to that position, we may be a little bit stubborn to move from that position. And that can be seen as being sort of, narrow-minded, whatever it may be. I think it's too simplistic, a look on that type of thing. I think you have to go rationally at the root of why you're criticizing that belief and disprove it. Offer an alternative explanation.
The thing we need to distinguish is the difference between where people get confused is they conflate Guruji. So for Guruji will say sometimes, he obviously Hindu Vaishnava, But he will go to a church, or he'll go and visit a shrine of a Muslim saint, and he'll pay his respects, or a Sikh Gurdwara, whatever it is. He'll go to different places of other faiths and be incredibly respectful, incredibly like, wow, look at this, and excited and like praising what
value it. He'll value
really
it,
valuing the situation, really valuing the dedication of the saints of other religions and so on. And so people think, okay, Guruji's doing that, and then you have another master like Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, right? Famously, he apparently, practiced different versions of Hinduism, Christianity and Islam, and he reached a climatic spiritual realization in each one, almost then stating that all these paths are valid. You have someone like Shirdi Sai Baba. Was he Muslim? Was he Hindu? Ram, Rahim are one and the same, And so when you see these great divine personalities unifying religions, unifying people from other faiths, we think that, yes, they're all the same. They're all just teaching the same thing. It's all love. It's all unity. It's all oneness, right? But that's shallow thinking. What Guruji is doing is he's winning over the hearts and minds of people regardless of their theology, right? And he's actually picking out the glory of love in every situation. Shirdi Sai Baba united Hindus and Muslims because he melted their hearts with his divine persona, right? And Ramakrishna, he wasn't a theologian preaching Islam, preaching Christianity, preaching Hinduism or Vaishnavism or Shaktism or whatever. He was practicing different things with a longing heart, and he reached a certain spiritual realization. So we have to distinguish the divine personalities who give experiential truths and melt the hearts of people, and actual theological positions. Distinguish the two, right? Once we are clear in our minds between the massive difference between what these great divine beings are doing and what theology is, then we can say, yes, there's value in all these traditions, there's value in all these rituals and so on, and all these practices, and we can really see that through these divine personalities, but at the same time know, this is what I believe, this is where I stand, and this is where they stand, and there is a difference, and sometimes a direct opposition, and acknowledge that without contradicting what these great masters have done.
I think it's a classic point, but it has to be restated that separating criticism of people and criticism of ideas is fundamental to this discussion, because at the end of the day, people identify super strongly with their ideas. Yeah. It's an unfortunate reality. But the fact of the matter is that if we cannot openly speak about ideas, which theologies are ideas, if we can't, in a sense, scrutinize them, and even if that leads to eventual criticism, that's a problem. Yeah, ideas have to be discussable. They have to be something that we can unpack and we can find problems in, as long as there is a constructive aim behind it. We're not just trying to do this because our intention is to harm or to put down anybody. We're trying to reach something practical of value in our lives, in society at large, whatever it may be. And so I think that I invite everyone listening to this, understand that separation clearly. When we criticize, for example, Islam, let's take Islam as an example, the doctrine of Islam, the theology of Islam, principles of Islam, it does not mean that automatically we are criticizing every adherent of Islam, every Muslim. I think that is a separate conversation. And I may also have criticisms towards them, but it's a separate domain in my opinion. And although there is some degree of entanglement, it's like somebody might want to sort of criticize our philosophy, Vaishnavism, as taught by Guruji, by pointing out bad behavior or attitudes that certain devotees hold. I would immediately tell them, don't confuse the two things. Because this devotee behaves badly, whatever it may be, that doesn't reflect on the quality of the philosophy or not. Those things have to be discussed in isolation of one another, although I understand the relationship that the two hold. I think they're just different domains of conversation. And I think also the point you mentioned is immaturity tends to lead to both extremes. So what that means is the one that says it's all just one is an immature, shallow conclusion. I agree. On the other end of the spectrum, there's the person that says rigid walls that cannot be touched, in a sense. Like you have only one path, one, let's say, sampradaya or one, whatever it may be, and we cannot accommodate anything from outside of that specific path, right? And so they look at Guruji and they see him as someone who clearly allows for external influences to mingle in this Vaishnava world, in this Vaishnava context. And they immediately come to one of those two conclusions, which is, either he's one of those guys that says everything is just one.
Yeah.
Mayavad and whatever else.
Yeah.
Or they'll say, well, he's not saying that, but neither is he adhering to a sort of strict, clear
It's so fun, isn't it?
protocol.
We get kind of...
So he gets criticized for that.
Yeah, we get attacked from both sides of the... That's the thing.
It's actually a topic that came up. I was on the podcast, Namras's podcast. It's not released yet. Hi, Namras, in case you're watching. Had a great time on that podcast. Really wonderful. But one of the questions that came up was somehow that. It was this attempt to have me explain a little better, how do we reconcile? The question, I think, was posed like that, if I remember correctly. How does Bhakti Marga or Guruji reconcile all these different things like Kriya Yoga and Bhakti Vaishnavism and saints and whatever else into one coherent package that the devotees can somehow unite around? Because clearly it's easy to understand some of the potential challenges that might arise from such a diverse culture. You might have some devotees that worship Ram and others that worship Narasimha and others that worship Krishna, and some that have more an affinity towards this saint or that saint or Christianity or this, that, and the other. And if those persons are all not just saying the same thing, it's easy to understand how you might think that the conclusion is going to be a completely randomized path. Nothing is actually clear.
Yeah, I mean, we can sometimes get accused of, when we follow the traditional Vaishnava stances, it's, you're just repackaging Vaishnavism, and you're just repackaging, just copying and pasting. And then when you do new things and Guruji introduces new things, you're just manufacturing, you're just innovation. Yeah. It's like, it's okay, which one is it? Like, are we repackaging and just copy and pasting, or are we just innovating?
And what I told him actually was that we're doing neither. We're neither like repackaging nor manufacturing. What we're doing is, Guruji is someone who has direct perception of truth, right? So what he does is he's trying to create something, a path, a community, a movement, whatever you want to call it, sampradaya, that takes us in the most effective way towards our ultimate goal, right? So in order to do that, his job is the difficult one, because he has to reconcile the various things in a way that come across to us as an understandable, executionable path. We can actually execute this path. And so what I said to him at the time was that he takes very clear stances on certain things. For example, he'll have Mirabai, he'll have the Varkari saints, he'll have Ramanujacharya and different persons in positions of esteem in Bhakti Marga. And then someone will say, but wait a minute, they preach different methodologies, or they have different traditions or different ways of approaching God, right? And Guruji's stance, or our understanding, is that doesn't matter, because we're not connecting with them, or in a sense engaging with them in order to emulate their approach to God, because we have the one Guruji's given to us. So Guruji gives from himself an approach to God, and he supplements that approach by these various personalities saying, look at the dedication of this one, look at the discipline of that one, look at this of that one. Like, he picks out specific virtues and qualities.
And that's the glory of a Paramahamsa, being able to pick out these a variety of things, and weave a garland of just love, all centered around love, and from so many different traditions and so much diversity. And so it feeds back into our main sort of concept, which is that the personality, the acharya, the master, the apta, he knows how to delve into a tradition, pull out the gems, and marry them in a sense of unity. Right? The conditioned mind, those who haven't had that direct vision, that of the supreme truth, we have to be careful. We have to be careful about having the potency and the power and the authority to be able to do that. And so we have to follow the master. He has woven the garland very, very carefully and very, very precisely, because he knows where love is. He knows how that is done. And he ignites the flame of bhakti, and it all works like a machine. It works beautifully, right? But we have to know those principles. And we have to know exactly where we stand. I repeat, we have to know exactly where we stand in relation to the other. But we also need to know the hierarchy. There's hierarchies of differences. If you have, like, say, a Shaivite, the supreme truth is not Sri Hari. It is not Vishnu. It is Shiva. Yes, that is a significant difference, obviously. But still, there is a reverential respect we can have. There's a wonderful reverential respect we can have. They are parallel paths. Yes, I understand. The supreme truth is depicted differently. Fair enough. And then you have a slightly more, you might even say, different path, which is the kind of impersonalist versus the Vaishnava. That, again, a very significant difference. We can't knock that. But you'll see Guruji, he is still able to go to a Shaivite temple, pay full respects, full honor to whoever's hosting him, genuine reverence for what they do, but at the same time, not compromising his stance. Even with an impersonalist, and this is where people get really kind of like shaky and a bit anxious and the sweat starts pouring down a bit, Guruji will sit with a Advaitin or impersonalist, and he will talk with them. He acknowledges, yes, they have a very, very, very important fundamental difference about the supreme truth. Very clear about that. But he still has a reverence for their sadhana, their discipline, their dedication, and so on, and their guru bhakti often, and so on. He still is able to toe that tightrope and keep that line. And and with us as devotees, when you're secure in your path, you can venture into other realms of massive difference sometimes and still be very secure. You don't have to have this paranoia, nervous, I might get infected or contaminated by the differences of other situations. And I think that's a wonderful example that Guruji shows.
He's consistently shown the ability to find reasons to praise those that are different from us.
Yeah.
I told this to Namras. I had so many conversations with Guruji where he praised elements of ISKCON, for example.
Yeah.
He looked at ISKCON and he says, it's so nice how they care for their deities. The decorations are so wonderful, or it's so nice how driven and focused they are on spreading their mission, or this, that, and the other. And that's by no means a lack of acknowledgement that there are differences. There are differences, end of story. But like you said, you started to touch upon this thing of hierarchy of differences. Some differences matter more than others.
Right. So, like I said, I gave an example of a Shaivite. That's an important difference, yes. Impersonalism, important difference. But you know what's even far, far, far more of a stark difference and a very, let's say, oppositional difference is this doctrine of exclusivity of truth, right? And I think sometimes as Vaishnavas, we forget that. We argue about the impersonalists all day long. You know, we get out the big textbooks and we get all the kind of Vedanta debates and so on. And, you know, we'll look down at the Shaivite or whoever it is, blah, blah, blah. And that's how it, but then when someone says, but what about Islam? Islam believes that, or at least a version of Islam, we'll caveat this a lot throughout the conversation. A version of Islam believes that this is the only way to truth. If you do not convert to Islam, you are going to hell. Yeah. That's just their way of doing it. That's just the way they think. A Christian believes unless you convert to Christianity, right, and you were originally sinful, and accept Christ's sacrifice on the cross and that his grace is upon you, you are going to hell for eternity. Yeah, that's what they believe. That's fine. The amount of Vaishnavas I've seen take this approach is so funny. But you tell them about the impersonalist, oh my God, meltdown, right? Meltdown. You tell them about the Shaiva, oh, this is a tamasic path, right? But you tell them about the Christian who wants to convert them, said you're going to hell. And or the Muslim that says, unless you convert, you're going to hell. They kind of just go, yeah, that's just life. You know, that's what happens. And it's like
we have to respect it.
Yeah, well, they're kind of like stuck in a Vedantic bubble from like the 11th century. And like we're in the 21st century now. Let's get real. What are the real differences that all of us should be concerned about and should be opposing? And I would say top of the list is exclusivity of truth. If any religion believes and says that if you do not convert and join my fold, you are going to hell for eternity. That is the doctrine of exclusivity of truth. And that is the most divisive doctrine in all theology, in my opinion.
Well, it creates impossibilities. It means that people who hold different beliefs cannot coexist. It means people who hold different beliefs cannot ultimately think positively about each other's paths. There cannot actually be mutual respect. A lot of these things that we naturally wish to establish between ourselves just become impossibilities. Look, I'll give you a concrete example from right now, what's going on right now in the world. Because I had this, the Palestinian Israel conflict is obviously complex. Yeah, there's levels and levels and levels to this dispute. There are financial reasons, there are historical reasons, religious reasons, political reasons, all sorts of reasons. Okay, and I'm not trying to unpack all of them. I just want to touch on one of them, which is the religious level. On the religious level, I was having this conversation with someone recently, and they were saying, like, it's so silly how they can't reach a peaceful outcome. And I said, it's not at all silly. You're missing the fundamental point as to why they will never reach a fundamental outcome of peace. Because no matter what else gets solved, or no matter what else is aggravated, whatever it may be, underlying all of this is their what most people often do is that they cherish their religious, ethnic identity above anything else. Religion matters more to people than other things, ultimately, most of the time. So, to the religious people, I mean. And so you take the Jews. The Jews believe that they are scripturally mandated to have possession of the land of Israel. The Israel is the promised land to their people, right? They're not going to suddenly stop believing that. They're not going to refute their primary authority, their scriptures that declare this to them, that came from the word of God, to say, actually, it's not convenient to believe this. It's not resulting in a nice life that we're living out here. So we're just going to refute this. We're going to reject this. It's not going to happen. Similarly, Islam, if you look at the Quran has plenty of statements about the necessity to spread Islam, how Allah is pleased by the spread of Islam, and what to do in the pursuit of that spread of Islam. And it fundamentally comes down to one point. It says that the world will not know peace until everyone accepts Allah is the one true God and Muhammad is his final messenger.
So let
me finish this point. And so I'm not saying that every Muslim in the world interprets that the same way, sees that the same way, etc., etc. Of course not. But it is there in the text, right? And so it just requires enough people to think that this is what it literally means, and this is therefore what we have to strive for. It's the striving for it that will not permit someone to say, I'm at peace with allowing some people to not follow Islam. I'm at peace with not following the instruction that has been given to me to spread Islam, and it just doesn't matter. Like, I'm okay with it, because that would be the ingredient for coexistence.
Yeah.
Coexistence requires you to be at peace with someone else, practicing, living, believing something else, as long as it doesn't impose on your own ability to practice your thing. Because that's the thing. Someone asked me, but aren't you hypocritical, because don't you want Vaishnavism to become the world religion? Yes, I do. I want Vaishnavism to become the world religion. Well, but then you're also the same thing. Not at all. Because if the world does not become Vaishnava, if anyone chooses to not follow Vaishnavism, I'm not going to have an issue with it. A, because I don't believe you're actually going to hell as a result of that. I don't believe your life is now condemned as a result of that. I believe you've taken a position, a choice to not follow something that I believe is universally better. If I'm wrong, I'm going to find out about that. I'm going to come back in another life because I believe in reincarnation. If you're wrong, you're going to come back and have another chance at this. There is no pressure for me to tell you, you must anything this way or that way. There is no compulsion. There is no order given to me to do this. It is something in which I can simultaneously hold an opinion that, yes, I believe this religion or this ideology is universally superior and universally better for mankind. But if you choose out of your own freedom of choice not to follow that, you have a different opinion about that, as long as you allow me to practice my version and I'll allow you to practice yours, there's no problem here.
Yeah. So that you've hit on a lot of points very quickly. So let me try and, for those listening, unpack it a bit more slowly. First of all, huge caveat coming in. Huge caveat, because I can feel the listeners saying, hold on a minute, are you saying all Muslims believe in exclusivity of truth? Are you saying all Christians believe in exclusive? No, we are
all
not.
Jews, etc.
All Jews, whatever. Yeah. There is tremendous diversity of belief within Islam. There is tremendous diversity of belief within Christianity. Not all Christians believe in exclusivity of truth, as is the case of Islam. So we just want to make that absolutely clear. Yeah. So whenever we say Islam believes in exclusivity of truth, we are very much aware that not all Muslims adhere to that, and not all Christians would adhere to that for Christianity. So we must be very clear about realization model versus a salvation model. This is what we teach in devotee courses and so on, for those who don't know. So a salvation model of religion has this doctrine of exclusivity of truth, that unless you convert to this religion, you are going to be eternally damned. A realization model of religion does not have this doctrine of exclusivity of truth. Instead, it has this an idea that life is a cosmic journey over many lives, and it culminates in the first-hand experience of God. It's a transformation in consciousness. So what you have is a clear divide almost. You have the Dharmic traditions of the East and the Abrahamic traditions of the West. Broadly speaking, exclusivity of truth exists in Islam and Christianity, the Abrahamic traditions of the West, whereas the realization model is more akin to the Dharmic traditions of the East, Buddhism, Sikhism, Hinduism, so on, Jainism. And so where you're coming from, this exclusivity of truth, When you have a one life scenario, there is tremendous urgency. This exclusivity of truth and the one life scenario very much are bound together. What allows the realization model to really flourish is the idea that you live many lives, that you are not this body and this mind, you are the eternal jiva, the soul, the atma, which goes through many lives, and you're on a cosmic journey towards that first-hand experience of God. If you are a Christian who does not believe in exclusivity of truth, automatically, even if you believe in a one-life scenario, you are still more akin to a realization model, because you're basically saying, I worship Christ, and he's my beloved, and he's the person whose grace is going to save me, and so on. But you may worship Krishna, and that's fine, or you may follow the Buddhist path, and that's also fine. That is someone who follows a realization model, but is still a Christian. Likewise with a Muslim can say Allah and His will. I submit to His will, and that's the way I go. But you submit to Krishna's will. Good luck to you, and I fully respect your path. We just have different paths, but so on. They may be a Muslim who follows a realization model. But as soon as you bring in the exclusivity of truth doctrine, suddenly you become a salvation theology. And this is where the problem starts, right? Why is exclusivity of truth such a problem? This is what devotees really, really, really need to understand. Take a pause. If a Christian or a Muslim says, if you do not convert to my religion, you are going to hell, you are eternally damned. Passively or actively, depending on their tone and how they express it, passively or actively, they are saying the following things to Bhakti Marga devotees and anyone other Vaishnavas who might be listening. Your guru is false, or he's actually misled and is confused.
And therefore is misleading us.
And therefore is misleading you. Your scriptures are false and teaching you things that are just completely based on ignorance. You're chanting the name of Sri Hari is an irrelevant practice and nonsense. Worshipping your deities, your murtis that you do puja to every single day is a waste of time, and actually, worse, is a direct offense of the worst kind in some cases towards God, right? This is actually what is being implied either passively or actively, depending on the person. Like I've someone I work with who is a Christian. She's actually Orthodox, the nicest person in the world. I would say she is as nice as any devotee I've ever met from any path. She's just sweetest person in the world, but she thinks I'm going to hell, right? I've got a Christian friend who also thinks the same thing, right? He's been my best friend since school. We played rugby together. We really close. I consider that still to this day, consider him one of my best friends. He thinks I'm going to hell. We argue often about theological issues, but he thinks I'm going to hell, right? So this doctrine of exclusivity is not just like saying, oh, he worships Shiva, it's a different version, or even like the impersonalist versus personalist tension. This is something else altogether. And this is why in so many courses or videos or whatever it is, I always rally against this doctrine of exclusivity of truth, because it's a very, very toxic doctrine.
I agree. I think it undermines any positive attempt to create a healthy coexistence. Yeah. So I'll give you an example. Guruji was asking me for years to do interreligious debates, and here in Germany, not too much of that happens. Yeah, there's some countries that do it more, some do it less. But I got in touch with one organization who was conducting these sort of peace conferences, and they were inviting representatives of each religion to come and to dialogue with one another. The objective being to establish some kind of common ground to promote peaceful coexistence between the various religions. So I went for maybe a year or more than a year. So it was at least once a month. So I must have gone to more than 10 of these conferences debating these people. And it was challenging. And it was always challenging primarily due to one person, because I wasn't playing the game that the others were playing.
Which was?
The game of let's ignore the elephant in the room. Everybody else was playing that game.
Yeah. Yeah.
The Christians and Muslims knew the tensions that exist between each other, so they didn't address them. I didn't feel like doing that. I felt like addressing them because I actually had hope that we could perhaps resolve them.
Yeah.
Call it naivety. Call it, actually, it wasn't so much naivety. It was me saying,
exposure.
If Guruji told me to do this,
Yeah.
there might be some positive outcome to be achieved through this. Like, so let me actually try to open someone's mind or whatever it may be, right? So after my first and sort of two experiences there, when I immediately recognized, wait a minute, this isn't as positive as I thought it might be, I started to adopt a specific strategy, which is that at the beginning of every debate, I would just look to the Muslim representative and I would say, before we start, just to save us all time, before we start, do you believe that me as a Hindu, that I'm going to hell? First question, right?
Yeah.
They would try to avoid answering the question. That was just strategy number one. They would say, brother, don't speak like that. Don't start like that. It's not nice. This isn't the purpose of why we're here today. It's not so simple. Things like that. And I said, I understand that. And I apologize if I'm making a tense, atmosphere. I'm really not doing that sort of for nothing. I just think this is fundamental, that if we're here for a peace conference, knowing that we're not really here to convert each other, but rather to coexist with one another.
So funny it's called a peace conference.
I think it's pretty fundamental that we don't start off by thinking that each of us is going to go to hell. Because I don't know how I'll hug you and shake your hand and reach a peaceful outcome. If you actually condemn my actions in my religious path as being one that leads to eternal hellfire and damnation.
Yeah.
I was never in the whole year that I was there able to get a single one of them to say, no, I don't think you're going to hell.
Yeah. No, years ago, I used to go to these kind of interfaith dialogues, and you get the Christian guy comes up and says, Christ speaks about love your fellow man and so on, biblical quotes, really nice quotes, turn the other cheek is fantastic. We have to tolerate each other. It's a nice word, tolerate. I mean, I can tolerate a lot of things. I mean, if you pinch me hard enough, I could probably still tolerate it, right? And the Muslim would come up and say, Allah's and our religion teaches about peace, Islam's religion of peace and so on. And then the Hindu would come up and talk about stuff, and you sit there in a crowd, and it's such a waste of time. Because ultimately, if you have a doctrine of exclusivity of truth floating around, no
one's addressing it.
There's no reverence between you. Sorry to say, let's just cut to the chase, which you did straight away, right? Cut to the chase. There is no reverence. Let me repeat again for those, just to really hit it home. If somebody says, if you don't convert to Christianity or Islam or whatever religion, you're eternally damned. It means your whole spiritual path is false. Your guru is false. Your scriptures are false. Your sadhana is illegitimate. It's a waste of time. Like even the impersonalists, Shankaracharya's philosophy, if they were looking at Vaishnava, they would say, it's not the highest philosophy.
It's not the best, but it's also okay. It leads to some positive outcome. There
might be a condescending tone. Kind of that kind of thing, or Vaishnava vice versa with a Shaivite or even other impersonalists. And this is what I would class as in Hinduism can have supremacist movements where a Vaishnava or a Shaivite thinks I'm the best in the town, but there's not this eternal damnation situation, right? It's completely different. It makes a massive difference.
I think it gets even worse than that. I mean, just to finish the previous story before I touch on this, the second question I used to have ready for them, because they would always dodge the first one, is I would read them a specific surah from the Quran where it says that the polytheists are the worst of created creatures. And I would say, I worship many deities. Does that verse relate to me? Am I the worst of created creatures? Right? And again, lots of dodging was going on. Twice someone admitted to it and said, yes. Yes, you are. Like twice they actually just owned it and said yes.
They were quite happy to say that.
Not happy. But they were honest.
It's uncomfortable, yeah.
They were honest about it. One time there was two of them coming together, two Muslim representatives. One admitted to it, the other one chastised him for admitting to it. But not that he was wrong, but why did you say it?
Yeah.
Why did you openly admit to it, right? And it came to a point where the organizers of the conference asked me to no longer return.
Right.
And it wasn't, and they were almost apologetic in doing so because their perspective was essentially, we understand what you're saying. Like, you're right, but it's sabotaging our purpose, because our entire purpose is to create healthy dialogue amongst the religions. You're killing it within the first 5 minutes because you just show up. And basically, in the entire year, we had two Christian representatives. I was the main Hindu representative, and we cycled through 6 or 7 Islamic representatives because they didn't want to come back anymore. After they came in and debated with me, they just didn't want to come back. So they have to keep finding other ones.
It's not that you refuted them. You just basically...
No, I asked them to expose their own beliefs.
Yeah.
I didn't even challenge them, fight them. I just said, is this what you believe?
Yeah.
And they were like, yes. And it made them look so bad in light of the idea of coexistence and peace that they just stopped coming.
Yeah.
And they literally had to say to me, we're going to run out of Muslim representatives willing to do this. And therefore, we're not going to be able to conduct these.
But interestingly, what about the Christian representatives? Did that happen there?
No, they were fine. So
they wouldn't condemn you and say you're going to hell?
Do you know what it was? I asked them as well, the question. And they were much more in the stance of, I don't know. They were. I'm not saying that that's wonderful, that makes me feel particularly warm inside.
Yeah.
But they were much more of the stance of, I don't know, because I think that God judges according to the information each one has available, blah, 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 blah. Like, they tried to go out of it, but they definitely didn't say yes. Right?
I've had that also from Muslims, that answer as well.
Yeah.
That, I don't know, depends what Allah decides. He's the one who knows everything. I can't judge you.
But if they had said that to me,
they genuinely meant it.
Right. I would have continued with the rest of the dialogue. I've got no problem with it. It would have led to my second question about the verse in the Quran that says the polytheists are the worst of created creatures. I didn't have a single one say, I reject that verse. Because think what that means. I reject that verse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The literal word of God.
Right. And I think that there's the problem. In the Bible, of course, there is refutation of the worship of idols. I understand that.
Yeah.
And you may say, well, did you similarly press the Christians on that point, right? I'll confess, not always. And so maybe it was also my personal bias that I didn't necessarily go there expecting to have a problem with the Christian, right? But I'll say this. In the dialogues that did ensue, because many of them we ended up discussing the whole hour or 2 hours or however long it was, the Christians, they were aware of their positions that would be in opposition to us, but they were constantly making an effort to find common ground and commonality in the sense that like, but what about your conception of this? Is it compatible with this? They were trying to reach common ground. What a lot of the Islamic representatives were doing was they were competing. They were trying to show me how Islam is better. Yeah. And again, it's just a format of the debate. If the debate was Islam versus Hinduism, I've got no problem. If the debate was Hinduism versus Christianity, I would have asked certain questions to them too. Right? But the premise of the debate was unity, harmony, coexistence,
love,
peace. That's why I picked on the Islamic more than I did on the Christians, because the Christians unanimously came to those meetings trying to establish exactly that. I didn't get the same from them.
So in my opinion, with Hindu Vaishnavism and Christianity, I think there is tremendous overlap, right? When we have the Charmasloka Sarvadharman Parijajamame Commission, 1866. Abandon everything, surrender to me alone. I will take care of your sins. And here we start to get very kind of Christian-like. I will take care of your sins. Mokshasyami Masya. I will liberate you. Have no fear. So a doctrine of pure grace. Just trust in me, surrender in me, leave everything behind, fix your mind on me, I will take care of everything.
The eradication of consequences.
Right.
And
so a clear doctrine of grace to a personality.
Yeah.
Right, of the supreme truth. Christianity is exactly the same. That theology is exactly that. Personality and a doctrine of grace. So there is tremendous overlap. We want love, unconditional love. And you see the saints of Christianity, their writings, you could easily just put them in a Vaishnava context and it would just flow 100%, right? Amazing. The doctrine of exclusivity, however, is for me the fundamental issue again. I mean, we can talk about original sin, karma, and so on. That's another quite a big fundamental issue.
I get a lot of Christians on my podcast commenting, sort of telling me that I'm deluded and Christ is the only way, etc., etc. That stuff goes on. Like don't take what I just said previously as me thinking that Christianity doesn't suffer from the same problems of exclusivity. They also believe in exclusivity. That wasn't the point. The point of what I was trying to make earlier is just that the way that they coexist with other religions or the way they interact with other religions tends to differ from the way that the Islamic, let's say, representatives tend to do it. It doesn't mean that fundamentally there aren't, in a sense, the same issues underlying it, right? So I'm just putting that
But
caveat there
as a
well.
Vaishnava, you could walk into a Christian context, especially the Orthodox Church or something like that, and really find, wow, this is beautiful. I can find Sri Hari in this environment. The way, the ambience, the ritual, the love,
Right.
the prayer, and so on. It's all very much there. Would you agree on that?
Yes.
Yeah. With Islam, I feel like there are some more fundamental issues. Obviously, exclusivity we've established is the fundamental issue, but even added to that, there are even more of their additional fundamental issues, such as when people, like I was in Brindavan, and then a very nice Brindavan devotee, she's from Europe, and she was basically saying, Vaishnavism and Islam, they're the same. We're worshipping Krishna. They're just doing
Submission to God.
Submission to God. They're surrendering to God. Abandon everything and surrender to God. Charmasloka and so on. And she was, wants to find that unity and so on. And I just said to her, do you know what? Traditionally speaking, maybe not all Muslims adhere to this, but traditionally speaking, what is the worst sin in Islam? Is it murder? Is it rape? Is it this or is that? She's like, I don't know. I said, no, the worst sin in Islam is shirk, right? It is attributing partners, a form, an image, a face, whatever it is, onto the supreme truth, Allah, and saying this is him, right?
Yeah.
That is the worst sin. That is the biggest offense you could do in traditional Islam. Do all Muslims believe that? Obviously not, but do a significant number do? Yes, I know that, right? You go to mosques, you're not seeing a lot of pictures of Allah there, right? Obviously, because they have this doctrine there.
Well, we know what happens when pictures of Allah or Muhammad
or whatever.
are made.
Yeah, exactly right. So that happens. And I said, what's the best thing in Vaishnavism? Loving a personality. With our deity, with our Laddu Gopal, right? With Sriman Narayana lying down with his hands up, Brahma coming from his navel, lying down Adishesh, worshipping that, looking into his eyes, being seen by the deity's eyes.
Lakshmi, his wife, pressing his
feet. Radha Raman temple, he's looking at me, right? You go to your temple, your deity. This is one of the absolute peak experiences of a Vaishnava, right? And this is what we strive for, the personality to be seen and loved by the face of God, right? And so when you have the highest thing in Vaishnavism being condemned as the absolute worst offense possible in your existence,
it is
Islam. And then you want to say they're absolutely the same. It's like, that's got to be peak naivety, right? That's got to be like...
And I think again, to try to play devil's advocate here, there is no such thing as Hindu love or Muslim love or Christian love. I do believe love is the same fundamental substance.
Yeah.
Yeah, so love is love. And I therefore understand if there is the ability to relate with a Muslim who loves Allah, because you're both expressing the same substance. You're experiencing something very similar. And so I understand those kind of touch points, those points of contact, those points where you feel like there's a lot to relate to. I think this is where, again, it comes back to what we were saying at the beginning of the episode. Naivety. Naivety is the key word. And naivety, I'll even be a bit harsher, and I'm sorry for doing that. It's not only naivety, sometimes it's just lack of intelligence. It's just being ignorant. And I think to be ignorant in the topic of religion, the landscape of religion, has severe consequences. I'll outline two. And I'm really now going to the controversial topics.
Hold on to your hat.
India is in many ways a cultural mess.
A biryani, I would say.
Yeah. And you could say that is inherent to it because of its multifaceted traditions and whatever else. It's not what I mean. I mean, it's a mess of various different traditions, not within the same umbrella, coexisting. So what I mean by that is the Indian Vedic civilization that is diverse, mixing with Islam, mixing with Christianity, Western principles, whatever it may be, leading
Bollywood.
into a very bizarre sort of mishmash of things. I lived there for some years and I've experienced it firsthand. And you see this even more so in northern India. And you see, the more you dive into it and the more you're willing to look beyond the surface, you'll start to see and ask yourself certain questions. Why is it that in South India, there are so many huge deities and huge temples, traditional, ancient, etc., etc.? Where are they in the north? Where is this tradition in the north? And then you study the history of Vrindavan, and you study the history of these holy sites,
This
Ayodhya,
this deity got moved
etc.
here.
And you go, this deity was relocated. Why was it relocated? Because the city was under Islamic rule. Why would that have been a problem? Because Islamic rule didn't tolerate the worship of the deities, didn't allow for the coexistence of the Hindus, which were native to the land. Okay, where are the temples? Destroyed. Replaced by what? Sometimes mosques, sometimes nothing. Just destroyed. And you think, what led to that? Was it might? As happens throughout the world, unfortunately. Some civilizations conquer others, some countries conquer others, etc. Was it just might?
Did the British do that?
Did the British do that?
British did a lot of things, fair enough. We're not...
They did.
Yeah.
I'm not going there
but
right now.
On this specific point.
Yeah. So my point being, it's this introspective process to figure out how did this come about? Because it's very hard as someone who is now an adherent to this tradition and religion to look at that and think, it doesn't matter, or I don't care, or that's just something from the past, because the past tends to repeat itself. That's the thing that everyone who studies history says the same. If you don't learn from the mistakes, if you don't learn from history, you're just essentially inviting it to repeat itself. Okay. So I looked at that and I thought, when did Islam enter India? And now we have plenty of historical accounts of this. And I started digging into it, and I started digging into it, and I started digging into it, and I started getting horrified by what I was finding. And essentially you have a period of, let's say, around 400 years. Some scholars debate whether it was from 1,000 to 1,400, 1,100 to 1,500, but in that ballpark, where Islamic occupation of India started to happen in a more serious, concentrated manner. Like there was a concentrated effort from Middle Eastern, let's say, Islam to enter into the Asian subcontinent. And as it did, I'm going to give them one benefit of the doubt here, which is they were acting in good faith. And what I mean by good faith is they genuinely believed that the worship of idols was offensive to God.
Yeah.
They genuinely believed that what was pleasing to God is to establish the philosophy of Islam, to establish the way of life of Islam and the Prophet Muhammad, etc. So they weren't necessarily doing it thinking, oh, I'm doing something bad. Of course not. I'm not attributing ill intent in that sense. But factually, their intent is made abundantly clear when they didn't ask permission to coexist. They didn't say, hey, can we hang out, live in the same area, but worship in a slightly different way, live in a slightly different way. They came and sought to destroy the Hindu way of life because it was in opposition to the Islamic way of life. And there was no compatibility model.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was allowed to happen. And here's where I will be criticized now by the Hindus and the Indians, by the naivety of the Hindus and the Indians. Because Hindus believe in ahimsa, Hindus believe in coexistence of different traditions and different faiths, because Shaivites and Vaishnavas and whatever else, this plural tradition looks at that and says, well, they're just one more. Okay, they're a little different, they're a little this, that, and the other. We'll find a way to coexist. And so no opposition to your arrival, to your entry necessarily.
Yeah.
Right? When the true intentions start to come to the fore, or when this, maybe not even true intentions, but when this incapability of coexisting starts to manifest itself, then it's too late. The point I'm trying to make is I want Europe to learn from the mistakes that India made and others historically, and not wage war on Islam or to close the doors necessarily. What I'm saying is there should be much more intelligent, aware scrutiny of the compatibility issue. So if someone's coming into Europe, are you compatible culturally, value-wise, etc., with what you are entering into, what we are welcoming you into, right? Because if you don't, then you're essentially saying, I actively, proactively, consciously choose to ignore the incompatibility issue. And then later down the road, when conflicts arise...
Why would you ignore it?
I think there are three reasons why you would do it. One is ignorance, and we'll marry the naivety to that.
Yeah.
Genuine naivety and ignorance, which is what we first started the podcast by leveraging that criticism of Bhakti Marga devotees, that there are many naive, ignorant Bhakti Marga devotees and Vaishnavas at large.
It
That is nothing malicious.
The same thing.
Nothing malicious, but they have genuine ignorance about this topic and genuine naivety, and it leads to problematic outcomes further down the road.
Yeah.
So that's cause number one. I think cause number two is vested interests. So what that means is I'm willing to sacrifice ground here because I have something else to gain from that. So what I mean by that is, yes, them coming in here is going to have a sort of cultural/religious incompatibility, but commercially, for example, I stand to benefit massively from cheaper labor or from finance, economics, whatever it may be. So it's a trade-off scenario where the person making that decision values one thing above the other, vested interest. So they'll say, yeah, sure. The third one that I would say is a reason why they ignore the incompatibility is a little more problematic in my opinion, which is fear. It's fear of what you will find out when you go down that rabbit hole. It's not naivety, because naivety and ignorance is, I don't even know that there is a problem.
Yeah.
The other one is, I know there's a problem, but I'm too afraid to tackle it because where will it lead us?
Yeah.
What will it make me as a person once I go down that road?
What are the ripple effects of it across society?
Fear. Yeah. And I'm not attributing this to Muslims or Christians. It is a general thing that sometimes any religious person has an issue inspecting other religions, truthfully scrutinizing, dialoguing, etc., because of what the outcome might be.
So I want to consciously make this more conversation, because some people might struggle with this conversation, right? It's a hot topic, right? And it's a controversial topic. So I think it's important. You made the point that ideas are different from people,
yes,
right? And let's really look at that carefully. So we talked about ideas of exclusivity of truth. We talked about, say, in Islam in particular, is the idea that worshipping deities or worshipping God with a form is the worst sin possible. Those are ideas. There are other ideas like submission to God, service to humanity is there, and you can find these quotes and references, and there are good stuff there, right? There is a multitude of good stuff there as
Agreed.
well, right? So we can't ignore that, and I don't want anyone to think that we're just.
It would be unfair.
It'll be There's some problematic things but there are some amazing stuff as well. Now, you in your interfaith discussion groups, the first question you asked was, "Am I going to hell?" Yeah. This is what everyone needs to wise up to. Everybody needs to wise up to this. That when you meet a Muslim or a Christian or whoever it is, right? What is your core belief? Do you believe that I am going to hell? Do you believe that I'm going to be eternally damned? If the answer is yes, then you have to say they are no longer a liberal Muslim or a liberal Christian.
Right.
Right. So I'm drawing categories here. Liberal Muslim, liberal Christian. A liberal Muslim will be someone who says, you know what? I worship Allah, you worship Krishna. That's fantastic. That's amazing, right? They don't just believe in tolerance. Tolerance is basically, I'll put up with you until I don't have to. Right? Yeah. When I don't have to put up with you, then I will not put up with you. Yeah. Right? That's what tolerance implies. Actual respect and reverence is to say, wow, you have a fantastic religion. It's not my religion, but good luck to you. And I hope you get what you need to.
Acceptance.
Yeah.
It's acceptance.
This is what you have to do. And it's amazing. And you have liberal Christians who believe that, and you have liberal Muslims who believe that. And this is where you find Sufi saints, mystics and so on, and all the good stuff that we know about Islam and, well, even what Guruji talks about in satsangs as well, right? Yeah. But as soon as you cross the border, this is why it is a border. It is a huge brick wall. Once you start saying, no, you are going to hell eternally, then all the things we just said start to kick in, right? And so you're no longer in the realm of a liberal Muslim. You now become a moderate Muslim, or depending on how much you adopt the political elements of your religion, which means the expansionist ideas, the Sharia law, the imposition of certain punishments or whatever it is, courts, whatever it is, the more strict you are with that, the less moderate you become, the more conservative you become, and eventually you climax in Islamism, right? This kind of and that's where you get to the radical Islam that that has a lot of toxic elements to it, right? So this is a spectrum of belief of this one religion. So this one religion, imagine, is a bag full of ideas. So many ideas, some very, very great ideas, wonderful ideas, spiritual ideas, right? Really good ideas. And some elements that are directly opposed to Hinduism, Vaishnavism. And then you have a whole spectrum of people, which are Muslims, which will look at that bag of ideas and be taking what they believe to be right.
Right.
Okay? And we have to part of not being naive for dealing with Christianity and Islam is to say, how do we distinguish the two? When do you cross over? And the key thing you do is, if you don't know much about religion, you think, I don't want to study loads of theology, just ask what you asked in that interfaith dialogue.
Yeah.
Am I going to hell for eternity? If they say, no, you're not going to hell, I don't believe that, then they fall into the realization model. If they say that you are going to hell, then they're a salvation model. If they fall into the realization model, they are liberal, and we can have a conversation. We can get along. We can have a melting pot. If you're Muslim, Christian, and so on, there's real unity, love, respect, reverence, and so on. But if they say, no, you're going to hell, you're a salvation theology, and then you start the spectrum of more and more dogmatism and conservatism, which can end up being quite toxic.
Yeah.
Right? And the Western world, individuals, Hindus, Vaishnavas, we all need, if we want to live in a real unified society where Hindu, Muslim, Christian can be together, we need to just really tackle this belief of exclusivity of truth so that there can be real love, real harmony, and real mutual respect and reverence. And that is the goal. That's what Guruji is trying to teach. And that requires smart thinking, not naive thinking.
I agree with you 100%. I think it also requires universal thinking rather than sectarian thinking. What I mean by that is, how can I live in a way that creates as much benefit to as many people as possible without excluding any particular group? Because if we want peace in this world, which we can debate whether that's a realistic outcome or not, but that's something else, but just theoretically, in a utopian situation, we want peace in this world. Surely one of the number one concerns you must have is, okay, then how can I create a system that is as accommodating, as sustainable, and beneficial to as many people as possible without excluding anyone? The minute we say this is, for example, a Christian principle or a Muslim principle, and we say if this was, if more people believed in Muhammad as the final messenger of God, we would all have a better world. That's a huge problem because it's incredibly sectarian. I am required to believe in a specific faith-based claim or whatever it may be in order to live in a prosperous world. On the flip side, if I say ahimsa is a principle to live by, that doesn't imply faith in Jesus or Muhammad or Krishna or whatever. It's just a universal principle that objectively leads to positive outcomes for as many people as possible because we're reducing violence.
And many beings.
Universally, beings, people, animals, whatever it may be, just a general reduction of violence across the spectrum.
Yeah.
You go, well, that's a universal principle. That's not a sectarian principle. That's the kind of comparison I want to draw here. One of those growing, so if ahimsa was to spread worldwide, right, who would really have an issue with this?
Yeah.
And if someone would have an issue with it, inspect that. Why? Why would you have an issue with non-violence spreading across the world, right?
Yeah.
But if you say, well, then why would you have an issue with, belief in Muhammad spreading across the world? Because I am not able to sit here and say that it has the same universal applicability to people of different beliefs and different faiths, right? For the universal well-being of everybody else.
But someone might say, but I want the right to be able to eat meat.
Yes. Good. So the right to eat meat, it's actually a really good question, and I think it also flips back in another way as well. It comes back to the question I asked myself earlier about, wouldn't you want the world to be Vaishnava as well? So if I go back into that, we're talking a difference between ideals and permissibles, right? So I want people's choices to be permissible across the board, as long as they don't prohibit someone else from living their version of what they believe to be right. Yeah. Eating meat is a very tough one. It's a very tough one because it's not like believing in one God or believing in another God. Yeah. So if I believe in Krishna and I have sadhana to connect myself to Krishna, and someone else has belief in Allah and has sadhana to connect them to Allah, I believe that should be 100% permissible.
Yeah.
No problem. Yeah. If someone says, I say I believe in non-violence, and someone says I believe in killing animals and eating them, I have more of an issue with this than I do with the first proposition, because in this case, you are taking away the right to life from that animal.
Yeah.
So you are imposing something on another being.
But the way I would say ahimsa should be spread is not by, it's a change of heart, right?
Of course. I'm not trying to make it doctrinal or anything like that. It was just to illustrate a particular point of universality, right? But I think that...
But not the threat of hell, all this kind of stuff like that, right? So I'm trying to say, I'm just trying to draw a distinction to the theological and this universal principle of ahimsa. We want to build more compassion, more love. What does that look like? It looks like when you look into a cow's eyes or sheep or whatever it is, chicken, whatever it is, and you look at that and you think, that's a living being. That's a living entity there. Do I need to torture that being? Do I need to slaughter that being just to satisfy my palate? Is that a thing to want? Now, there'll be the kind of, I know in Britain there'll be these people who say, no, eating meat is my life, this is our tradition, steak on a Sunday and so on, all this kind of stuff. Yeah. And it's like, I get my point of it that you have the legal right to do it. You do that. If you want to do that, that's your thing. But my hope would be that there'll be a change of heart and a raising of love and compassion, which coincides with the universal principle of ahimsa, that eventually we as a society, we could gradually work towards this stage of no violence, or as little violence as possible to all living beings everywhere across the world.
I agree with you, but I actually think that the argument I presented is the solution, because it's about imposition. That we're not imposing things on people that they don't accept. And now you may say, well, laws are an imposition. Not necessarily. Not if the laws exist as a prohibition of that which causes imposition. So it's like tolerance. Oh, I'm tolerant of everything except intolerance. You have to be like that. Like there are certain things that you cannot, like ahimsa. Yeah. Ahimsa has actually got that embedded into the system, that ahimsa is non-violence except in the case of protecting the system of non-violence.
Yeah.
So if someone's going to compromise the system that promotes non-violence, you're permitted to be violent in the defense of that system.
Yeah.
Right? So violence can be used defensively, not offensively, that kind of thing. So the same way, I think laws exist.
I mean, this is really obvious stuff, yeah, but it's just...
It's not, though.
But
sadly.
Sadly, it's not. But when you just think of it very, very, it's very kindergarten stuff. But the naivety, and this is what I was saying before, when I talk to people about this, I'm talking to a samskara. I'm not talking to someone who's thinking rationally. You're just unpacking it rationally. It's impossible to just really go against it. But when you're dealing with a samskara of, I want to love everybody. No, everybody's pure and we must embrace everybody.
Do you know what? Let me push back on one thing there, because I've heard one person say this before to me, and I want to see how you react to it. So I'm unpacking
this. Don't trigger me, yeah?
I'm unpacking this rationally. You're right. So one person said to me once, it's fine, Revati, you're very rational, but love isn't rational. And they said it to me like this was like silver bullet, just killed all my arguments. Like, love isn't rational, so you can play all your rational games, but at the end of the day, love is love.
Yeah.
And love conquers all barriers, and love overcomes all obstacles.
They're confusing...
What do you think?
They're confusing love as a transcendent truth, as a transcendent, something that's transcendent and divine, with rationality, with being beyond logic, right? So they're basically saying love isn't rational. So they're basically saying it has to be irrational.
That's the thing. It's not, by saying love is beyond rationality, doesn't mean love is therefore irrational.
Yeah.
I'll give you a concrete response. I said to the person, but would you also say that love is dumb?
No.
And they said, well, I guess not. I was like, so love is intelligent, right? Wise.
Yeah.
And they were like, yeah, that's all I'm speaking of. Yeah. When I'm trying to unpack this rationally, I'm trying to elucidate love's intelligence or love's wisdom, or the way that you promote love intelligently. Because again, this comes back from one of the first points I made, where I know a lot of people with excellent intentions, but they've never taken the time to think how to make those intentions actionable in a rational, intelligent way.
But look at Guruji, right? He's love.
Yeah.
But look at how he takes people step by step. He knows where they are. He knows their desires. He knows their fears and insecurities. And that's why he goes slowly with some people. Some people he can accelerate. This is love being titrated with wisdom according to the needs of the situation, right? It's not irrational. It's not dumb. It's transcendent. And when it's transcendent, it automatically is wisdom. It is wisdom, right? And look at Hanuman, right? Hanuman wants to serve his master, Ram. What does he do? He articulates with Ravana, and he finds sophisticated arguments and uses the most highest knowledge to defeat and debate Ravana, right? Out of love, service to his master, right? So like that, we need to understand that love is not irrational. Love is not vain emotion. It's not just sympathy. And that's what Guruji said once. I asked him when people were coming up to him in, I think it was South Africa, telling him all kinds of problems. like all kinds of problems. One by one, I happened to be listening to them, like someone died of this and someone died of that, really difficult problems. And I said to Guruji afterwards, I said, don't you have sympathy for these people? He said, no. He said, if I had sympathy for these people, how can I help them? Right? Which means to say, he's giving love, not petty emotion.
Because he loves you, he'll propel you forward. He'll push you forward. He won't settle for what it, whatever is the status quo.
So that is why when we say we're devotees who want to express the love of Guruji, that means we have to have tremendous wisdom, and that starts with, because we're conditioned mind, we don't automatically have access to that, transcendent wisdom. That means we have to educate ourselves, stop becoming naive, stop becoming ungrounded, become aware, become alert, know our principles of what makes our path, know what runs counter those principles, and when necessary, when it's appropriate, we may have to push back. Caveat this again, we are not looking for trouble. We are not going around looking around, knocking on doors, asking for tension and debates and so on. We want to live with everybody peacefully in unity. That goes without saying. However, we are increasingly facing a world and situations where our beliefs are going to come under scrutiny and opposition will come, and we must know how to react.
Agreed. I think we're not looking for trouble is absolutely accurate. We're also not running from it. And I think that's if when you asked me what are the causes for why somebody would ignore these incompatibility issues, and I named the third one as fear, a lot of devotees are afraid. And I would say to them, the way you mitigate that fear is by becoming qualified to handle the obstacle in your face. I'm afraid of going into a cage with a UFC fighter and then, saying round one. Yeah. I'm afraid because I don't have the skill set to combat him. I don't have the capacity, right? So I'm going to go there and just get knocked out. Yeah? Sure, I'm afraid of that. What's the way to mitigate that? Well, A, don't step in the cage. I get it. But no, if I have to, if the scenario is you've got to do this, right? It's to train, it's to develop the skills, it's to prepare myself the best I can in order to handle what's in front of me. I think running away from impending challenges is a surefire way to a miserable life. It's a surefire way to just digging your head in the sand and hoping that your problems go away. This isn't real. Yeah. That's Maya. That is pure illusion to think that problems disappear because you just stop looking at them. Yeah. And so what I'm trying to invite the devotees to do is equip yourself with not only understanding, but also try to purify your intentions. What are you actually trying to achieve here? Because I'm not trying to militarize people into a counter-offensive. I'm trying to establish people that are willing to stand for what they believe in, but also to stand for what is, as I said, universally beneficial. One of the things I cannot fail to say in this episode is my criticism of the Hindutva movement. The reason I'll say it is because I believe that Hindus have started to gradually wake up to some of the flaws in their own way of living and thinking, historically speaking, that they've been too accommodating, too naive about many things. But unfortunately, a lot of the responses that they have made to that naivety is to go in the opposite extreme and to almost emulate the behavior of those that committed the error in the first place on them, the aggressors, so to speak. So they start to play the exclusivity game in reverse. They start to claim superiority. We're the best. You suck. Only our way is right. Only this, only that, Jai Ram.
Yeah.
Right? And anyone...
Theologically, it's still not exclusivity of truth, but there's a kind of...
but the conduct is.
The etiquette is,
It's the etiquette and conduct that I'm really coming at, because you can't really manipulate Hindu philosophy into an exclusivity situation.
Because of reincarnation, if nothing else.
It's,
right?
Exactly. It's almost like it's got a fail-proof sort of solution inbuilt into the tradition, right? But you're looking at this situation and etiquette, behavior, and that's what people look at first and foremost, because, look, reincarnation, these things are still abstract realities to some extent. On the human level, on our interaction as people in society, we'll look at Islamic extremists and Christian fundamentalists, and we'll characterize those people as being so dogmatic and exclusive and this, that, and the other. And yes, we're going to have to put Hindutva people in that category as well, because they're getting into a point where they behave like they belong in that category.
So I tell you one classic thing, and it's about language. And I said this to you before, right? So when you criticize Islam, and say some politicians have I mean, obviously there'll be some unfair criticism and there will be genuine bigoted views, right? That go out there. There's no question about that. And, that obviously we would condemn. But when you have legitimate views, which would say, look, I think people who are gay have the right to be gay and exist without fear or, of being persecuted or whatever it is. Yeah. I think that's a human right. And then if Islam says that, no, being gay is illegal according to our jurisdiction and so on, and they should be punishable by X, Y, and whatever punishment it is, if you were to condemn that and then you would get called, you might be sort of saying, oh, no, you're Islamophobic, the buzzword of Islamophobic. And I think as soon as anybody uses the term Islamophobia, you immediately are signaling to me you have no argument, you have low resolution thinking, and you have to resort to a buzzword to try and win an argument. And with the Hindutva situation, I'm also seeing the same word, Hinduphobia, being thrown around. As soon as someone criticizes Hinduism, look, sometimes there may be things to criticize in Hinduism, okay? There just may be, right? And sometimes we have to say, as Hindus, as Vaishnavas, that look, this isn't really a practice that we would agree with. It's happened, and whatever. There may be some justification for it at the time. It's no longer relevant. But just simply throw, I think, Hinduphobia. I think, again, it's a cheap buzzword that it kind of runs in and mirrors what sometimes Muslims or those you throw out when Islam gets criticized. And I think we shouldn't go down this route. We have to be mature about the way we deal with it. If there are criticisms made about our faith, we should push back without the buzzwords. And it's just a small example of what you just said. Yeah. The Hindutva movement being something that could be a very good thing of just, really saying,
standing up for Hinduism.
This is our identity. This is what we're about. Pushing back against, stupid criticism and, bad stuff, pushing back, doing all of that without the nonsense of the aggressive nonsense, that unwarranted, not violence and oppressive of other people.
I agree with you. When I was having conversation with Hridayananda Das Goswami on the podcast that we did together, I talked to him about Vaishnava bickering, right? The Vaishnavas fighting amongst each other, and asked for his take on it, and he just pinned it down to immaturity. He said, "I think it's just immaturity. The more mature you are in your understanding, you know that these things don't ultimately matter." I've, and since then also in conversation with him and in other examples, seen him propagate something that I've often also pushed for, which is the separation of fundamental principles and periphery points, points on the periphery of importance. And I think the same thing needs to be understood on the religious level to two different conclusions. You mentioned about the significant overlap between Christianity and Vaishnavism. I would say Orthodox Christianity and Vaishnavism have even more overlap than anything else. I think there's a lot of sadhana there. I think there's a lot of guru-disciple relationships, renunciation, a lot of things like that really start to even create more synergies and more overlaps. And I think therefore, fundamentally, meaning that it's not just on the periphery, that you start to get some fundamental similarities as well, right? And yet there's one thing that I think people are going to expect me to say, but it's not the point. The fact that Christians think that Yahweh is God, or that Jesus is God, and I think that Narayana or Hari is God, is a fundamental difference. I actually disagree. I don't think it's a fundamental difference. As long as you believe that it is a person, supreme person, perfect person, absolute truth embodied, I actually don't think it's a fundamental difference. It's a difference only of name, form, and identity. But that the person, the attributes, the being itself exists in that fundamental manner is a point of actually connection, in my opinion, not distance. Where I think there is the more fundamental difference is not therefore in the concept of God, but exactly as you pointed out earlier, in the exclusivity issue. That is at the most fundamental core. And I say that again at the end of this episode now as a sort of a summary, because people assume that our disputes across religions or across sampradayas or whatever are because of name, form, shape of tilaks, clothes, and all these sorts of things. And it's not. It's not. I actually have no reason to fight with a single Gaudiya Vaishnava. Can I be honest with you? I have never in my entire life looked at a Gaudiya Vaishnava or a Vaishnava from any other Sampradaya and had the urge to fight him.
Yeah.
Never. Until the moment that they choose to fight me. Until the minute they start to pick a fight with me by criticizing to the point of saying you're illegitimate.
Yeah.
It's not criticizing, I think you could do this better. That's not what I'm talking about. It's the illegitimacy point. It's you should not exist.
Yeah.
What you're doing should not be allowed to exist. This is not genuine. This is not okay, right?
I tell you why I wouldn't even do that to... The reason why I look at, say, a Shaivite, I take that example all the time, right? Because, and you say, oh, well, they're not following the highest truth, Mayuran. You know, the highest truth is Vaishnavism, is Sri Hari. And it's like, look, I don't know the dharma of that person's soul. I don't know how Sri Hari is relating to that soul and how he's taking on his cosmic journey. I'm not going to get him. I'll offer him Vaishnavism and my path and dialogue if the opportunity arises. But I'm not going to look at him and condemn him for what he's doing, right? Or whatever it is, or even look down on him in any way, right? Yeah. I will have reverence, because for all I know, that is his relationship with the Supreme Lord, and that is the way he is guiding him through his path and his Atma through this whole cosmic journey. And so that is the way I want to look at it. But you're right, we have. It's like when Vaishnavas argue, it reminds me. I just have this picture in my head of like two people who live in a house and they're arguing about which shelf of the fridge to put their food on, right? Forgetting that they don't actually have a roof, right? That there's a massive hole in the roof, right? So instead of looking up and going, there's a massive hole in your roof and you're arguing about which shelf of the fridge to put your food on, I look at Vaishnavas arguing like that.
So let's characterize those two things. I think I didn't originally intend to discuss this, but I think it's important. So what would be a perfect example of the argument of the shelf and the food, which shelf we're putting the food on? Like, so an argument that Vaishnavas do have, but that is actually meaningless ultimately.
Oh yeah, Krishna's higher than Narayana.
Okay, great. That's one. And what's the roof? What's the hole in the roof? What's the thing that is happening there that's much more serious that we're ignoring?
You're surrounded by people who follow an Abrahamic tradition that actually think that your whole religion, your whole theology, and your whole system and all your scriptures are actually just corrupt, illegitimate, false, and lead you to eternal damnation.
Right. So it's in a sense the fact that Vaishnavism just isn't an acceptable mainstream religion in the world. And it's usually characterized as a cult.
Not only that, it's a fast track to hell.
Yeah.
Let me put it as cleanly as I can. Because what you're doing in Vaishnavism, for some Abrahamic religions, is the worst thing you can do as a human being.
And I think the problem is even greater than that, because people might think, yeah, but that's just in Abrahamic countries. They think things like that about Vaishnavas. So we as Vaishnavas living in the West, we encounter that type of situation, but Vaishnavism is indigenous to India. Therefore, you have to actually assess how Vaishnavism is viewed in India. Okay, let's do that. Even in India, authentic Vaishnavism is seen more and more and more and more as an archaic thing that isn't meant to be carried forward and isn't actually acceptable. Like, to behave like a Vaishnava. Yeah. Right, is not like, oh yeah, that's commendable, that's great. It's seen more as like, oh really, you're going into that old-fashioned stuff. So I think that's part of that hole in the ceiling. It's part of just the general problem that Vaishnavism is being relegated to cult stuff, like fringe stuff, weird, like esoteric Hindu mysticism, whatever, instead of like rising to be a credible, genuine, let's say, movement, philosophy, way of life that more and more people are able to recognize and praise, in a sense, be proud to belong into and to live like openly across the world.
Why it's so stupid that Vaishnavas argue in this way is that we are all worshipping the Supreme Lord. He is a person, unconditional love. We're chanting his name. We're doing puja to his deities. The overwhelming commonality is a tsunami of commonality, and that absolutely dwarfs all the difference, even Vedantically, of all the sampradayas. And the fact that we want to sideline the tsunami of commonality of love and the unity we could all have together, because we want to argue over these little philosophical points. Do you know what it shows you? It shows you that our mind is not on Krishna's feet. it's on something else. That we're too busy looking over the fence at the differences between the sampradayas that we're so distracted by that we're not even focused on Krishna's feet. Those people who are constantly trying to harbor this Vaishnava divide are simply signaling that their mind and their heart is not on Krishna's feet. Yeah, I mean, I hope we've unpacked it and shown enough detail and nuance. I mean, there's going to be probably plenty of comments, I suppose.
Yeah, it's fine. Here's actually, this is an interesting thing. I haven't so far had the policy of responding to a single comment on my podcast, because I just thought the minute I start responding to comments on my podcast, the expectation will be there from everybody that, well, he might respond. And so then I have to kind of respond to others, otherwise I'm neglecting them or ignoring them or whatever. So far I've just stayed clear. That's been my policy. I'm announcing my policy. So far I've stayed clear of responding to comments. I have a feeling on this episode I might have to break that policy. I might have to
caveat and qualify.
It's qualifying. I believe that no matter how many times we tried to introduce caveats and try to qualify things, I'm also aware that in a 1-2 hour discussion and with the various statements that we made, we're not going to be able to touch all the positions and explain them all as nuanced as we would like to.
Yeah.
And so I'm probably going to have to respond to some of your comments, criticisms, thoughts, ideas constructively and see where the conversation goes.
And maybe if it's warranted, we could revisit this
for sure
and tie up some loose ends if it's necessary.
I think it would make sense to, because I think people are going to have questions that are valid. Like, could you maybe then help me reconcile this and that, for example, or make valid counter questions towards
you said this, but you didn't think about this,
right,
you know,
right,
all that
and
kind
I would
of
be
stuff.
happy for us to sit down together and then just hash those things out. Because again, I'm always careful, because I know how much it's easy to misrepresent the depth of the thinking and experiences that we've both had that leads to these outcomes and this understanding that we've arrived at. Today, this afternoon, I was having a chat with some of my devotee brothers here at the ashram, and Sitaram, who I also did an episode with, right? He works in the Middle East. He's a football coach and he works in the Middle East. And he asked me, what's the podcast with Mayuran going to be about today? I told him, and he said, it's interesting, that topic, because I used to have an opinion about the Middle East, and I know people who had an opinion about the Middle East that was much more like accommodating and this must be just media drama.
I think it's like Dubai sort of thing.
Yeah, it's all like Dubai or whatever it may be. And he said, look, I've been treated well there, don't get me wrong, but I've been to these places now, pretty much every country, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, etc. I've been to all of them. And he said, if you go there and you think that you just feel free and comfortable as a Vaishnava to express your Vaishnavism without any issues or whatever, that delusion will be broken very quickly when you're there. It will be very quickly removed from you, right? And and therefore his point was very like tranquil. It was just, people just lack that experience. They've never been exposed to that, therefore they don't know, and they make assumptions based on, ignorance.
Yeah.
Thanks for the discussion. I think we made it. I think we're good.
Yeah, it's cool. Let's see what happens.
Jai Gurudev.
Jai Gurudev.